I would say, remember what that iconic French statesman, the Marquis de Talleyrand, was once said to have said: it's worse than a crime. It's a mistake. And that's what this whole thing was, a mistake.
Washington remains a Twitter right now, with everybody asking who, if anyone, is going to get sacked over Signalgate. But smart politicos know that the real battle here is about who is going to define President Trump's foreign policy. Will it be the old school hawks or the more skeptical isolationists? It's a big question that plays into many of Donald Trump's ambitions. One person who knows a lot about Trump's thinking on these issues is his former national security advisor, John Bolton.
Trump views international relations through the prism of his personal relations with foreign leaders.
Bolton, as you know, is a household name. But it bears repeating that he's had senior roles for every Republican president since Reagan. And he had that notorious falling out with Donald Trump because he's not afraid to speak his mind. I caught up with Bolton over video on Thursday, and we talked about everything from Signalgate to how Trump fires people, the deep fissures in the Republican Party over foreign policy, J.D. Vance's apathy toward Europe, and what it's like to be the subject of Trump's personal vendetta. I'm Rachael Bade, and this is Playbook Deep Dive. Thank you, Ambassador, for joining us. Appreciate it. Welcome to Deep Dive. So within hours of being sworn in, President Trump revoked your Secret Service protection despite the Iranians having a price on your head. Just to sort of start, what is it like to know 5 years after you're sort of falling out with him that he's still thinking about you on his first day back in the White House?
Well, I'm glad to be on his mind. I guess that's the only thing I can say. It was obviously had an effect on me and then the others whose security protection he canceled. But the bigger effect is on the U.S. itself. When foreign adversaries think that senior American officials, former or present, can be exposed if they fall out with Donald Trump, that tells them something about our vulnerability, and it tells his current senior advisors something about their vulnerability too. This is not the way to run a railroad.
Do you fear for your life now without that security? Have you had to go buy or pay for private security?
Well, I'm making arrangements with the specifics of which I won't get into, but sure. Look, this is not chatter on the internet. This threat, not just to myself, but including Trump and Pompeo, Esper, Milley, and others, is a conclusion of years of watching the Iranians and pretty solid information about the nature of the threat. So I don't think the Iranians give up easily. They were after Trump just before the election, as charges were filed against a Pakistani trying to hire a hitman against Trump himself in the period before the election, which is pretty brazen. So it continues to be current, no doubt about it.
Let's talk about Signalgate. I want to get your reaction to all of this, obviously. So when you were national security advisor, how often did you put highly sensitive attack plans, as they're calling them, into a signal with a reporter?
Well, I didn't use Signal then, and I took a pretty simplistic approach to things.
I was being sarcastic, just by the way.
I would say that there are two kinds of communication when you're in one of these senior administration positions. There's communications over the government's secure telecommunications network, on which we have spent billions of dollars and decades of effort to make impenetrable by our adversaries. So there's that option, and then there is every other option. And every other option is not acceptable. You don't know how any given conversation is going to go. If I wanted to speak to the Secretary of Defense, I can have something purely non-classified to talk about, but the conversation can shift very quickly to something else. If you're on a secure line, it doesn't matter. If you're in a non-secure communication platform, then you're at risk.
Well, I was going to ask, how does like a well-oiled national security apparatus sort of conduct business on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning or weekend, basically, when you're not in the office? Like, the excuse they've sort of given is that, oh, everybody was sort of everywhere. We weren't in the office. It sounds like that's not an excuse.
Look, if you want a group chat, there's a place for it. It's called the Situation Room. And if it's Saturday or Sunday, that's too damn bad, isn't it? The United States is about to engage in using military force. You got something else more important in mind? Number one. Number two, with a few exceptions on that list, like Steve Witkoff, whose presence is inexplicable to me. But for the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Director of National Intelligence, Director of the CIA, National Security Advisor, they are never more than an arm's length away from secure telecommunications. I had that kind of capability built into my house. I had a SCIF built in my basement by the National Security Council staff. In all these people are receiving protection of one kind or another. They have secure phones in the vehicles they travel in. They have secure communications on their desks. It's just inconceivable.
Let's talk about the fallout. You know better than anyone, there's sort of two things President Trump hates the most. Number one, he hates an embarrassing headline, right? Anything that makes him look bad, doesn't like it. But he also hates giving longtime critics a win. So far, we have sort of seen that his concern about the latter, basically Democrats, the media, whatever, getting a win by, axing someone, that has protected Michael Waltz. But at what point do you think the former, embarrassment to him, becomes the thing that's most important?
Well, and it's the former that's most important. If he thinks he's suffering political damage as a result of this, then I think the risk to everybody involved goes up, both holding on to their jobs and also the risk of real investigation. I think as long as Donald Trump doesn't feel the heat, nobody will be investigated for anything, and they won't lose their jobs, at least in the short term. But the second metric at work is what has all this done to Trump's view of the people themselves? How much of this does he take before he says it's not worth the risk down the road? Now, that isn't going to happen this week or next week or the week after. But we had Hegseth earlier in the incident with Elon Musk, somebody maybe inviting Musk to the Pentagon for a briefing on the China war plan. Remember that war plan?
I do,
Uh,
yeah.
Trump specifically said later he didn't think that anybody should receive a briefing on the China war plan. That's the correct position. And he said almost gratuitously, Elon has a lot of business in China. That could be a conflict of interest. Well, indeed, it could be a conflict of interest. And that was another signal. He didn't like that at all. So I think Hegseth already had one strike against him.
Hmm.
The signal chat issue, maybe two strikes against him. But at some point, I do think people become vulnerable. But it would be, as you say, no action will be taken until a couple months from now at the earliest, when suddenly they'll find some very attractive way to spend more time with their family.
It's interesting that you brought up Pete Hegseth because some people have been surprised that all the focus has been on Michael Waltz. I mean, we talked to people in the White House. The anger is not at Hegseth. I can tell you that for certain from my own conversations. It's all focused on Michael Waltz. And yet it was Pete Hegseth who put, this at least sensitive information about strikes and timetables into the chat. I mean, what can we sort of take away or read from the fact that people close with Donald Trump are not talking about Hegseth? And in fact, I think the president said yesterday, Pete did nothing wrong. This was all Mike. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it says Waltz is more vulnerable. And I don't think that's entirely fair. Everybody on that Signal group chat had a responsibility to protect government secrets. And, the daddy on that chat, the highest ranking official, was the vice president. It's another stunning thing to me is that at some point when Hegseth began reporting what was happening or what was about to happen, that somebody didn't say, let's take this out of this channel and put it on the high side, the classified side. Nobody said that. Everybody is responsible for that chat continuing. Waltz may have started it, but everybody else allowed it to go on. Hegseth has said in his defense that, well, I had a duty to keep these people informed. No, he didn't. That's the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, doesn't need to know when the second F-18 strike group is about to take off. The only other person, I think, other than Hegseth himself, who should have been kept up to date moment to moment was Waltz, because he might have to tell the president or he might have to notify somebody else. When you're engaged in a military operation like that, let the operators operate. What does Susie Wiles have to know how things are going? She'll know. Is she going to say, well, I don't like how it's going so far. Why don't we do this instead of that? So Hegseth's own justification for sending this information out is not becoming what a defense secretary should be saying.
I want to come back to Hegseth versus Waltz in a second, but just very quickly, your read on this is that this would have been classified information, correct? Even though they're saying it's not.
It's clearly classified information, and including saying that the terrorist target had been seen walking into this particular building with his girlfriend, and now the building was flat. Well, how do you think we get that information? Is it in the newspapers? Are they broadcasting it on Houthi TV? Obviously, it comes from sources and methods, and just to put that out in a non-classified channel is incomprehensible to me.
Is it true, though, that the Secretary of Defense can sort of declassify things on a whim? Like, did they have any sort of leg to stand on that? Like, if he decides this is not classified, therefore it is not.
Yeah, well, if in terms of a defense against a criminal prosecution, if it's not classified, that may have something to do with it. But remember, the fascination with did they violate the law as opposed to did they just do something that no reasonable person shouldn't have done distracts from the real issue, which is potentially putting American service members in jeopardy. So I would say, remember what that iconic French statesman, the Marquis de Talleyrand, was once said to have said, "It's worse than a crime. It's a mistake." And that's what this whole thing was, a mistake.
So to go back to this notion of, who's the more vulnerable fall guy here, Hegseth or Waltz, how much of this is sort of this ongoing civil war happening in the Republican Party right now? Or, I mean, this sort of break we're even seeing with some in the administration. You have some who are more sort of Reaganite, more hawkish types like Michael Waltz, like Rubio. And then you have, I guess, sort of a restrainer branch, right? The MAGA America First sort of faction of the GOP. Do you think that faction is putting the blame on Waltz to try to push him out?
Well, I've read some of your reporting on it. I really think it's pretty much a one-sided more by the pro-Russia faction within the MAGA movement against what you might call the Reaganite, more traditional foreign policy wing. And they're just obsessed with finding remnants of prior Republican administrations and purging them. I think the more Reaganite people are just trying to do their job, but it shows fundamentally that if that is a description, that how non-serious these isolationist, neo-isolationists are, and how they don't understand really how much is at stake here. I think the bigger question is the responsibility everybody on that group chat had. And rather than pointing fingers at particular individuals, why didn't at some point somebody say, we've got to get off Signal and get on to classified channel? I just can't understand. Even if you got into it inadvertently, let alone the fact there's somebody on this chain that nobody knows who he is, nobody asks about it, nobody checked it. It is something that our adversaries will take advantage of. They see this and they say to themselves, this can't be the first time they did this. Now, maybe it'll be enough to stop it happening in the future, but we don't know how much damage may already have been done. Just because a foreign government gets intelligence doesn't mean they act on it. It may mean they piece it together with other things. They want to see if information they're getting from that source will produce more information in the future. You don't reveal something and risk blowing the source. So understanding what harm may have come to the United States as a result of these Signal chats, first this one on Yemen, but perhaps others. I mean, that is a very serious question I haven't heard anybody ask about.
So do you have confidence that Michael Waltz is sort of going to be somebody who pushes back on this sort of America First isolationist wing at the party that you think is sort of taking over right now? And if so, do you want him not to resign? I guess I was going to ask, do you think he should resign? But given that I'm hearing from, we hear from Speaker Johnson, a lot of more traditional Republicans that they don't want him to go. I'm curious what you think. Like, do you think he should stay?
Well, if I said I thought he should stay, that might hurt him. So, the old saying in politics, I'll be for you or against you, whichever does you more good. I just think at this point, the only issue for Donald Trump is whether he's being hurt. And I don't see that he's suffering harm at the moment. It could be polls will show that there is harm. But that doesn't mean that in his mind, many of the actors in this particular drama have really used up a lot of their political capital and are on very thin ice with him down the road.
So you've obviously had a falling out with President Trump. Didn't leave the White House on good terms yourself. What are the early signs that someone like Michael Waltz should be looking for, whether it's subtle or otherwise, that might determine that he is in the offing?
Well, when the president said, as he did last night, well, I understand Mike took responsibility for this. You got a question, ask Mike. This is not a good sign. And it's not even a good sign for Hegseth. He's defending him now because they're under attack by Democrats in the press. But that's not to say that in his own mind he hasn't separated himself from them because he doesn't know what the full consequences are going to be, and he's protecting himself. But one thing that's typical of Trump is he starts asking people, his friends and associates outside the government, "Hey, what do you think of this guy?" And once he starts asking, this is not a good management technique. I'm not recommending this to anybody, but it's what Trump does. And if
Yeah.
somebody gets feedback that Trump's asking, the membership of Mar-a-Lago or other well-placed individuals what they think of them, that's not good.
Speaking of President Trump as a manager, I mean, can you just talk for a few minutes about what it's like for him to fire someone? I mean, this is a guy who became famous from The Apprentice. You're fired, right? But that's not really how he operates, right?
No, I'm not sure I don't know all the people he's fired, but I'm not sure he's ever fired anybody in person. I mean, John Kelly told Rex Tillerson he was no longer Secretary of State via long distance phone call. I don't know whether it was classified or not, but Tillerson was in Egypt when he was told. Reince Priebus found out he was no longer chief of staff after he got off Air Force One, and there was no car to take him back to the White House. Trump doesn't like the confrontation. He finds somebody else to give the person the word that their services are no longer required.
So I want to pull back a little bit on various foreign policy, national security topics. But just to sort of segue us here, I mean, if we didn't already know it from Vice President J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference a couple weeks ago, we certainly learned it from the Signal chain. He has a lot of disdain for Europe, and that he basically views them as a bunch of freeloaders. He made it clear he thought that intervening with the Houthis was bailing Europe out. Can you speak at all to what's sort of behind this animus that he has behind Europe? Obviously, you disagree with it, right? And I guess I'm wondering, do you think he has the sort of persuasive ability to sort of bring President Trump to that sort of point of view? Because the president is not necessarily in the same place.
Well, I can't explain what what is what is motivating Vance, but I do think that it reflects a very primitive view of international relations, and really not that dissimilar from Trump, where everything is a matter of dollars and cents. There's no appreciation for what a collective security, a collective defense organization like NATO is, and what it gives the United States, how it benefits the United States. I think in part we're suffering from 35 years post end of the Cold War, where uh, we've had inadequate expression of why America has strategic interests all around the world and why we need to protect them, why a forward American policy benefits us. We've heard too much, frankly, uh, from from liberals about how we're doing this for the sake of democracy around the world. And in fact, that's not correct. We're doing this in substantial part because it's in our interest to do it. That whatever minimal amount of order there is in the world benefits us. It's true that many of our allies don't bear their fair share of the burden, but we're not doing this for them. We're doing it for us. And if we don't do it for us, nobody else is going to do it for us. Take the Yemen situation where the Houthis have blocked uh, the critical Suez Canal, Red Sea maritime passage. And while it's true that most of the trade that goes through that is between Europe and some other part of the world, it has been a bedrock principle of American foreign policy since before we were a nation, that we believed in freedom of the seas. And little secret for those who don't know it, the seas extend everywhere. They're all connected ultimately. And when we see a violation of freedom of the seas, we have throughout our history acted to end it, no matter how big other people's interest in it were. So, a little history for J.D. Vance. Thomas Jefferson, in his first term, fought the Barbary pirates on the coast of North Africa. This is where the um, line in the Marine hymn comes from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. That's Thomas Jefferson in 1801 to 1805, because the Europeans paid tribute to the Barbary pirates, extortion money, we would call it today. And Jefferson said, we're not going to pay tribute. And so Stephen Decatur became a great American hero by his actions there. That's on the shores of North Africa. That's not very far away from the Red Sea. And Jefferson did that at the beginning of the 19th century for freedom of the seas for America. The first American naval squadron in the Pacific was in the 1820s. We didn't even have states on the Pacific Ocean. We have been an international maritime power from the beginning. The first ship from America that went to China called the Empress of China was commissioned in 1783, the year of the Treaty of Versailles granting our independence. So I would say to the vice president, if you want a little lesson in freedom of the seas and American policy, it's all out there. Just open a book.
But just to bring it back to his sort of disdain for Europe, I mean, I think I have seen that you have talked about how the happiest you ever saw President Trump was when he was at some sort of state dinner, right? With was it
Queen
King
Elizabeth.
Charles? Oh, Queen Elizabeth. Okay, yeah. So talk about that. Like he's not in the same place, right? Like he talks about NATO, yes, in terms of other countries needing to put more money into NATO, but he's not out there saying, oh, we're going to blow the whole thing up, at least not at this point. Do you think that he's going to end up in the same place that JD Vance is?
Well, I don't think Trump thinks in conceptual terms. So there are parts of Europe he likes and parts of Europe he doesn't like. Keir Starmer made a very astute move in his first visit by bringing an invitation from King Charles for another state visit. As you said, I've never seen Trump happier than in his white tie at the dinner with Queen Elizabeth in Buckingham Palace. I have to say it was quite an occasion. But another white tie dinner with King Charles this time, fantastic. Other monarchies in Europe should do the same. He was thrilled to be invited to the reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral by President Macron even before Trump was inaugurated. He's a builder, so he knows about cathedrals and things like that. There are ways to get to Trump the Europeans need to think about that. I don't think it occurs to Vance that might be a problem for him.
We've got to talk about Ukraine and Russia here. I mean, Trump's art of the deal clearly is to sort of entice Putin to the table with a carrot and try to force Zelensky to the table with a bat. Is there a charitable explanation for why Trump is showing so much sort of deference to Russia and sort of treating Ukraine so harshly?
Trump views international relations through the prism of his personal relations with foreign leaders. So he thinks if he has good relations with Putin, then the U.S. has good relations with Russia. That's not true, but that's what he thinks. He thinks he and Putin are friends. By contrast, he has not had a good relationship with Zelensky since the famous perfect phone call of 2019 that led to his first impeachment. So therefore, he thinks that if he gives his friends some advantages, like all the concessions he's already made on Ukraine, that will help bring the peace. He wants this war behind him. He thinks it's Biden's war. He said during the campaign it never would have happened had he been president. Putin doesn't think they're friends. He thinks Trump is an easy mark. And he thinks he's manipulable. And he has been manipulating him, as when Putin said several weeks ago, Trump was right that if he had been president, there wouldn't have been a war in Ukraine. Well, maybe so, maybe not. But Trump loved to hear that. Then they released the hostage Mark Foley. Then Lukashenko and Belarus released another American hostage. This is the manipulation at work. Now, I think Putin's got to be very careful that he doesn't overstep it here and risk losing some of the concessions that Trump has made. And Trump made a statement last night that indicated maybe he thought Putin was slow rolling things. It's not inevitable that Putin's going to get everything that he wants. He could make a mistake, but the odds are in his favor now, and I think he does want to slow roll things because he believes momentum on the battlefield is flowing in his direction.
What do you make of President Trump's posture toward China? I mean, on the one hand, he's talked for a long time. I got to be tough on China. We're going to be tough on China, tougher than Biden, et cetera, et cetera. But then he delayed the TikTok law, enforcing that ban without divestment. I know there were a number of Republicans on the Hill who were super pissed that he took out, or the administration took out, this sort of provision in a spending bill in December that would have sort of stopped or culled American investment in China. What do you make of his position right now? Or can you even really define it?
Well, I think he blames China for his loss of the 2020 election because of COVID. Of course, he didn't lose the election. It was stolen, but if it hadn't been stolen, China might have cost it. But beyond that, going back to his first term, he wants at some point to negotiate the biggest trade deal in human history with China. So if you look at a very tumultuous opening 2 months, while tariff measures have been traded back and forth by China and the United States, it's been relatively quiet compared to a lot of other fronts. And I think Xi Jinping is waiting to see a little bit better what Trump is going to do. And I think Trump, hoping for this opportunity to do the biggest trade deal in history, has not been willing to turn the heat on yet. I think it's a huge mistake. I don't care whether they sell TikTok or not. It ought to be banned in this country. It's an arm of Chinese intelligence. Doesn't matter what's on the platform. It's a vacuum cleaner of American habits and actions that entirely benefit China.
Do you think, though, that they have the upper hand, they being China, TikTok, because the president is not going to want to get rid of it, go through with it?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. He was against TikTok before it helped him in the election. This is the epitome of Donald Trump. If it's good for me, I'm for it. If it's not good for me, I'm against it. And he doesn't mean American national interest. He means the interest of Donald Trump.
Last question for you. I know obviously you've been very critical of President Trump in his current foreign policy, but I'm wondering if you can walk a mile in his shoes. Is there anything you think he's doing right on the global stage right now?
Well, I think the closing of the southern border seems to be going very well. He's not doing what he wants to do in terms of deportation. He may never be able to. But it turns out he was able to close the border in the first term, and he's doing it again now because the principle of deterrence works against illegal immigrants, too. If they think they're going to walk across Central America and Mexico and get to the Rio Grande and not get in, they're sensible enough not to leave their homes to begin with. What happened in the Biden administration was, with great fanfare, they said they were going to eliminate the policies that Trump had put in place. So all across Latin America, they started packing their bags again and heading for America. I think most Americans favor more immigration, but that we should pick who comes in and not the immigrants themselves. So he's got himself a victory on that score. I don't think there's any question about it.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Bolton. I know a lot of people want to talk to you about this Signalgate, so appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me.